And we are back with more from our panel. Kelsey, let me talk to you about this sense of hope coming out of Senator McCain's memorial service, this emphasis, country over party, bipartisanship. We kind of get a test of that on Tuesday, right? When Congress heads into session to start these proceedings to confirm Judge Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. Will anyone remember the sense of civility that they were being called to behave?
Well, we're already seeing on Twitter and from statements from organizations on both the left and the right trying to pressure people away from that bipartisanship. We're seeing, particularly on the progressive side, there are a number of activist groups who are saying that Democrats should simply walk out and not attend these hearings. That's not something that Democrats in the Senate really want. They don't want that pressure because they say they take this very seriously. And the process of confirming a justice who will have a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court is something where they want to be in the room. But again, progressive activists are aghast about this argument about not just the documents. There's been a big fight, I'm sure, as we've discussed in the past, that they want more documents related to Kavanaugh's time in public service, particularly his time in the White House. And Democrats say they haven't received enough. And Republicans say they've gone far out of their way to make sure that they produce more documents than any other justice nominee has ever, they've ever seen. This fight is really gearing up progressives, and they feel like they are losing a battle against, filling the court. And they worry that the Trump administration is putting a stamp on not just the Supreme Court, but the lower courts for generations to come.
And talking about walking out, because basically when it comes to votes, this is a fait accompli. Republicans have the numbers, right?
It's not clear yet. There are a number of people who have not yet said how they are going to vote. Republicans like to think that it's a fait accompli, but progressives say that they could still pressure some people in the middle to change their minds if they're able to kind of get the public more engaged.
Mm-hmm. Salena, how much does this resonate with the voters you talk to?
Well, for a lot of voters, in particular evangelical voters, their decision to finally vote for President Trump was on the Supreme Court. His ability to pick someone as conservative for the Supreme Court. He put that Federalist list out when he was running, and this is where a lot of them, went from their reservations to, okay, I'm going to vote for this guy. They're very energized and excited about this. This is something they're going to be watching, and I will say, I think one of the most vibrant things that we do in Congress is to watch I'm old enough to remember, like, the Bork, when Judge Bork went through the process. These are one of the most vibrant things that Congress does. But, Trump voters are going to be watching this. They're excited about it, and they're hopeful that he gets across it. And I think it actually helps entice some voters who are going to stay home in November because they're exhausted to maybe come back out because they got that win that they wanted.
Margaret, is this something that the White House feels confident that they can get those votes?
I think on balance they do. I mean, Brett Kavanaugh is well within the mainstream of conservative background judges. He's served for a long time in the Bush administration. There are a lot of documents available about him. He is someone you could see being nominated by a different mainstream Republican president. And part of the question about privilege really does go to his time inside a White House. There's a pretty long-standing pattern of privilege. Also, as a side note, there's a lawyer named Bill Burke who's getting a ton of work because he's President Bush's lawyer, as well as John McCain's lawyer, as well as a bunch of the lawyers for former
Steve Bannon's lawyer, right?
Yes, administration officials who may now be a target of other stuff. So, but look, even so, it's obviously incredibly important to the president to get this done. And there are a lot of people that he's glad to be done with who will be gone also after this confirmation. So for those political reasons, as well as the prize of the court. And after all, he's the president. He won an election. Elections have consequences. Yep. He has the power to fill spots on the Supreme Court when they come open.
Salena, I put Margaret on the hot seat at the get-go. I'm going to ask you personally as well to respond to what has been some criticism of your journalism. The Huffington Post coming out with an article specifically about you, saying you didn't identify a Republican in a story specifically as a Republican official, and called into question a lot of your work. I'd like to give you the opportunity to respond to that.
Sure. As you can imagine, this has been an interesting week for me. It all began through a series of tweets by an anonymous troll. And as the internet goes, it just expands and expands and expands. I addressed with the questions that were asked to Ashley, and also I put my own personal tweet out there addressing each issue that this anonymous person did. My editors have reviewed everything that I work for and all the places the news organizations I work for, and they stand behind my work, and so do I.
And you will be, I think, detailing some of this in the coming days beyond this conversation here. You also, though, have touched on, or you mentioned some of the social media outcry. There's been this outcry and some fundraising on behalf of Republican congressmen, particularly Kevin McCarthy, on this idea that social media companies are censoring conservatives.
Yeah.
Is there anything to that you have experienced?
Sure. I had a story that I wrote for the New York Post a day or two after Cohen and Manafort had their, lovely little legal issues come out, where I went out and I talked to Trump voters to see, does this change you? Does this take you away? And within 24, I wrote the story, I posted it, and in the morning it was gone. There was a notice that said it did not meet Facebook's community standards. I received a flurry of direct messages and emails and so forth from people who also posted the story and said, hey, I put your story up and it's gone. It's marked as spam, or not meeting community standards. And that was just a straight story. But the New York Post is considered a conservative publication. I work for two conservative news organizations, along with the Washington Examiner. And there is that impression that happens.
And social media companies deny that there's censorship. Kelsey, there's going to be some hearings, though, with the Twitter CEO in particular answering questions this coming week.
Yeah.
How much of an issue is this going to be?
I imagine it's going to be a huge issue. We're already seeing telegraph from many Republican offices that they expect to talk about this very directly with the CEO. I would expect, though, that this may not get as much coverage because it's going to be happening at the same time as the Kavanaugh hearing. So I will be interested to see how which thing breaks through on that day.
Ed, we had some mixed messages coming from the Trump administration on North Korea policy. The president saying he blames China for any kind of progress being stalled right now with denuclearizing North Korea. Is there anything to that? And are we stopping or are we continuing military exercises? Because the defense secretary seems to be saying something slightly different than the president.
Well, I think that we saw Trump then rebut any idea that there might be a reopening of military exercises. He came out and said on Twitter that military exercises are still on hold right now. And I think that will be the policy until it changes. On the trade war thing about China, I think he's basically just trying to find a reason to sort of justify the continuing trade war, which doesn't seem like it'll end anytime soon. When I talk to Trump administration officials, they say that China has actually been playing ball with sanctions on North Korea. Chinese banks have not violated the sanctions rules. In general, those sanctions are still in place. China's abiding by them. And so I think they're looking for a reason to explain the stalling on the diplomacy.
All right, Ed, thank you very much. We'll be back in a moment.